The film opens on a little island off the west coast where a photographer by the name of Samuel is capturing shots all over. We observe that majority of the subjects he photographs are dozing off at opportune locations. As it happens, the island is currently experiencing an odd situation. People began dozing off suddenly 3 days ago, in the middle of a vehicle trip, in a sauna, and even while swimming underwater. The watchers were initially only perplexed, but they quickly discovered that those who slept would not awaken, perhaps in a state of coma. In the previous 72 hours, several medical professionals and researchers have visited the island, but no one has discovered a treatment for the rare epidemic. All of the island's year-round residents are now sound asleep, the fortunate ones in their houses, others at work, others at the grocery store, or in their automobiles. Their body is operating correctly, but whenever they leave the spot where they fell asleep, their pulse increases unnaturally. It's fascinating that the phenomena had no effect on those who had not lived on the island for a long time before it happened. Because of this, scientists have built a camp and equipped every sleeping person on the island with a tag so they can be monitored. No reporters are now permitted in the infected area, but Samuel has managed to smuggle past the border when things are chaotic. He boards a bus with sleeping passengers to capture photographs while on the excursion. He chooses to take a live goldfish that he finds being held by a woman with him. Samuel communicates with the fish as though it were his soul buddy because of the absurd situation. They eventually arrive at a residence that appears to be nice enough to stay in for a few days. When Samuel enters carefully, he discovers a woman asleep on her bed. Stella was one of the fortunate last to nod off, and her name is. Samuel waits in the other room so as not to invade her privacy. He is unaware that the researchers are stationed outside his house keeping watch over the neighborhood. He is concerned that he will be punished if discovered because everyone who is aware has been instructed to leave the island. The next morning, Samuel has a dream that he runs into Stella at the grocery store, but she scarcely acknowledges him. She asks him how he knows it when he calls her by her name, unexpectedly waking him asleep. Samuel begins a new experience as he chats to Stella as she sleeps and listens to the news on the radio. The epidemic has everyone talking, and weird disputes are starting to emerge. Samuel chooses to tour the island during the day after making fun of them. He initially spots a comfortably sleeping handyman who is fastened to a tree. Additionally, he learns that the island's animals are still alive and wonders who is looking after them. He finally arrives at the church, where a sizable number of people lie unconscious, after roughly an hour of wandering. Samuel sits down, snaps a few photos, and then nods off. He and Stella are seated across from one another in a restaurant in his dream. They converse about Samuel's activities on the island while acting as though they had known one another for ages. Stella objects that he is using the circumstance for financial gain, but Samuel counters that his goal is to get experience, not gain money. Later, he digs through Stella's possessions when he gets home to uncover her daily notebook. His bond with Stella deepens as he reads it, and he keeps having dreams about her. She reveals to him that she was among the final people hit in the dream. Her piano instructor, who was dozing off in the middle of a lesson, was the first person she noticed going unconscious. Stella responds that she was more puzzled than she was terrified when asked whether she was afraid. When the physicians and researchers arrived, they only learned that the patients shouldn't be taken from the locations where they fell asleep. Stella finds it amusing that if she gets out of bed, there's a risk her heart would burst. Samuel then seizes the chance to inquire about her feelings before to her passing out. Stella calls it a dreamlike sensation. She began to lose herself in her bizarre, vivid visions, not noticing that she was slipping into a deep slumber. The scene shifts to the following day, as Samuel embarks on yet another journey. This time, he visits a new neighborhood and finds a vehicle loaded with balloons. He attempts to take a photo of it but discovers the medical personnel close and has to dash back home. Samuel is brought back to reality by the event and thinks that he has taken enough photos and should leave the island. He bids Stella farewell, gathers his luggage, and then makes his way to the coast where his boat sits. He eventually changes his mind after spending a considerable amount of time at the shore inspecting the boat. He notices the faucet is flowing just as he enters his house. Although Samuel recalls that it had been running when he had first arrived home, he is certain that he had shut it off. He abruptly returns to the restaurant table across from Stella in his dream. She wants to know why he came to the island in the first place. Finally admitting that he came here just for her, Samuel. It turns out that he had seen Stella in the grocery shop a year earlier while on holiday on the island. Later that day, He followed her to a restaurant since she appealed to him because she appeared to be youthful and carefree. But the evening ended before he could ask for her phone number, and he was never able to meet her again. Back in the real world, Samuel goes food shopping, but two researchers also enter the store to purchase alcohol. Samuel is struck by one of them, but he manages to escape by acting unconscious. After they go, he happily goes shopping for necessities and even pays the cashier who is still asleep before carrying the items home. After that, he wanders about Stella's home, looking at her possessions and contemplating what kind of person she would be. When he discovers a tape recorder in the attic that includes recordings of the list of her favorite items, he strikes gold. The more Samuel listens to the list, the more enamored he becomes, even if it contains strange items like the sound of a typewriter, headless Barbie dolls, and flamingo floaties. Stella lists driving on the beach as one of her favorite activities, so Samuel imagines him and Stella going vehicle shopping outdoors for a trip to the beach. He fears taking from individuals who are fast asleep, but Stella persuades him that they are only borrowing it. They quickly settle on a vehicle they want, then they break into the owner's home to retrieve the keys. Stella's independent personality appeals to Samuel, who begins to doubt if she is merely a figment of his vision. Later, when he wakes up, he hears a vehicle outside and sees two medical professionals entering the home for a weekly checkup. Just before being discovered, he quickly gathers all of his possessions and hides in a closet. The employees examine Stella for any anomalies before leaving shortly after. The rest of the day is spent with Samuel talking to Stella as he is lying next to her bed. He enters the attic once more the next day and plays the second segment of her tape. This time, she discusses the things she despises and admits that she feels vulnerable and alone. Samuel wishes he could do something to cheer her up, but he is unable to do anything. He enters his fantasy once more and begins conversing with her. The pair discuss soulmates, and how each person has one. Stella rejects Samuel's claim that they may be each other's soulmates. Samuel ultimately makes the decision to leave the island because he no longer has a reason to stay there after returning to reality. He gets halfway to the pier but finds it difficult to part ways with Stella. He goes back home at night and uses Stella's stash to get high while having dreams about them smoking together. He sets out on a mission to do everything on Stella's list of things she likes starting that day. For the same reason, he cooks lasagna and sips beer from a wine glass. When inebriated, Stella shows up in his nightmares and is enraged by his failure to leave her alone. She claims that she is not the Stella he has come to know through her notebooks and videos. She is correct, Samuel realizes. After all, he has never spoken to her in person and their connection exists just in his mind. Stella begs him to leave her alone and vanishes into the night, while he makes an effort to convince himself that traveling to the island was not an error. Samuel makes the decision to depart again in the scene that follows, but this time his path is unique. While traveling, he has odd hallucinations and acute hunger. He breaks into an apartment to slake his thirst, but the more he drinks, the more thirsty he becomes. He recognizes he is ready to nod off like the others as the walls begin to close in around him, frightening him with worry. He makes every effort to remain awake when an imagined Stella calls and asks him to come home. He abruptly wakes up and rushes back to her residence, saying that if he must fall asleep, he would like to do so next to her. To Samuel's complete amazement, he wakes up the next morning. He's not sure how long he can remain up, though. He takes the chance to compose notes for Stella in case she ever has a chance to read them. He needs the full day, and when it's through, he too enters a coma. Stella starts to move in her sleep a few days after some time has passed. She opens her eyes, wide awake after more than a week of slumber, and things change. She walks up to the water faucet after realizing she is completely exhausted. At this point, she notices a second toothbrush on the counter and assumes she has been sharing a home with someone else. Stella is hesitantly walking up to a dozing Samuel in the living room, more perplexed than afraid. She attempts to wake him awake but eventually gives up. Her favorite oddball possessions, like a Barbie doll without a head and a huge flamingo pool float, are all throughout the house. Stella is happy to see them, but her joy quickly fades when she learns that Samuel read her notebooks and listened to her cassettes. She strikes him repeatedly in a fit of wrath and finds the letters he penned for her. He tells her that he is sorry for listening to her cassettes and that she is just like everyone else. He reassures her that it's good to feel lonely and to fortify her defenses, but he urges her to be authentic. Stella is overcome by the notes, as she discovers that the stranger in her home is completely familiar with her and that she too feels as though she has known him for a very long time. She has multiple nightmares with Samuel in them during the following few days. As he did with her in his fantasies, they talk about his loves, dislikes, concerns, and obligations. Stella is aware that they are connected despite the fact that they haven't even physically met. Like a result, she looks after him just like he did for her. The next morning, Stella experiences a welcome surprise when she wakes up later than normal. The sofa where Samuel was sleeping has been moved. The two initially cross paths in the kitchen, but they immediately recognize one another as long-lost lovers. Samuel welcomes her and shakes hands with her after making an introduction. He is glad to meet her. The bus where it all began is returned again in the concluding scene. When the woman whose goldfish Samuel had taken awakes from her nap, we notice that she is holding two fish instead of one.